So you would have picked this breakout, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I told him, look, keep me off the main stage. Just keep me in educational training type of environments. There's a bunch of people that had to come to this. This will be good. Anyway, good. Go ahead and get started. We might, what I'd like to do is actually interact with the crowd. So the only way that would work is if you feel like trying to wedge in. I might take a few questions from the first 3 rows. So other than that, we're just going to get going. My name is Hugh Halter, and we wrote a book called The Tangible Kingdom that came out a couple of years ago, and so that's how most people probably recognize us now. And I'm going to give you a little bit of that story. To help me out, though, we're going to kind of frame the day talking about how to turn sort of consumers into missionaries. But before that, how many you've not read the book, you have no idea about our concepts or our story? So what I might do is take a few minutes and just kind of frame that out for you. Because it's important to you understanding stuff. Somebody came up to me after our first session this morning and they said, I really love the misery of your life. And I think that was a compliment because I shared that our sort of journey into this whole thing, the book, our story, it really has come out of a lot of what would be sort of miserable, tough circumstances. A little kind of backstory on us. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and we planted our first church there. And it was, technically a normal sort of church environment. I'm classically more evangelist, love to get stuff started, but the church actually did pretty well. And about year 3, it started to be very church-like. And so what was, the first couple of years, what I would say is a very incarnational type of ministry turned into the standard pastor's life. And got to the point where my wife called a family caucus one evening, and that was with my wife, of course, and my 2 daughters, who at the time were, I think, 3 and 5, and my older son, who was probably about 12 at the time. And my wife said, I said, so what are we going to talk about tonight? And they said, the kids have something that they want to say to you. And so my oldest daughter, Allie, at the time, said, Dad, you suck. And I looked at my little daughter, McKenna, and she just kind of went. And so then they left. My son didn't want to really get into it. So the girls left, and my wife and I were just sitting there. I said, so, really, it's that bad? She's like, yeah, it really is. And she said, I just want you to know, I'm never going to leave you, but you should know about this point in our marriage, I don't know if I want to live with you anymore the way that you are. And so I said, look, can I get some details on how that is? And she just said, look, when I married you, you were the fun guy. You were the happy guy. Everybody wanted to hang around you. And ever since this thing turned into a church, you've gone away. You're stressed out from Thursday all the way to Sunday. You don't really want to go out on dates because it's too close to Sunday. You're working on your sermon like crazy. You seem really stressed out all the time. And she was right. I used to actually, I told a group that I was with this morning that I almost didn't go into ministry because I never wanted to speak publicly. And so I went into Christian counseling. I eventually got kicked out of the counseling program there at Western Evangelical Seminary. But most of my life trying to figure out how to do pastoral stuff, it just was miserable. I would drive to church every Sunday, and this would literally be after 40 hours of working on the sermon because I was so afraid to talk. I just would keep going over and over and over the thing. Never felt like I actually had it, thank you, down enough. And most Sundays I would actually have to pull off into this, it's called Lloyd Center Movie Theater parking lot in Lloyd's, kind of a Lloyd Center area of Portland. And I actually vomited a few times, but I would have to go through about a half-hour talk with myself to just drive the rest of the way to the church. I didn't feel like I could do it. And then after the sermon, my wife knew that I couldn't come home, so I would walk down to a local pub, and I would have sausages and beverages that they serve at the pub. And then I could start. I was good on Monday through Wednesday, and then it would start up again. So Cheryl was basically saying, look, if that's going to keep going on, just want you to know it's not going to go real well with the family. So we eventually, there's a lot more to that, but we resigned from that first church plant, and it was a great church. And we decided to sort of be nebulous missionaries and be consultants. Moved down, took my family about 2 hours south to Eugene, Oregon, and then everything started to change. And I don't want to go through the whole story again, but if you've read the book, there's a part of the story where I'm in New York City in a local Irish pub, and I meet a woman named Fiona who was from Ireland. And make a long story short, and this was, I flew into LaGuardia the first day that it opened up after 9/11. So we were training church planters. Everybody was very serious. I was kind of pretty jaded, very tired, fairly exhausted. So we're training church planters, and I meet this woman, and we begin to talk about not church or anything like that. We just started to talk about the kingdom. That's all I could talk to her about. And to make 4 days of discussion with her very short, she taught me that the culture is very much looking for the kingdom. And it got me to where I actually called my wife the next day and said, look, we have to move somewhere again. And so this was just 4 months after taking my whole family out of the city that we had grown up in our whole lives. And I said, where do you want to go? And she picked Denver. So we moved to Denver to just sort of kind of restart. And a lot of it was my restart of trying to get away from that pastoral feel. Now, some of you are gifted in that, and what I describe, you don't. You drive to a church environment week after week, and you love the study, you love the preparation, you love pastoring, Christian people, stuff like that. That was kind of foreign to me. And so I'm kind of in this recovery mode. But I remember in processing Fiona as a non-Christian being really interested in the kingdom, that was kind of a rebirth for me. It's like, could I ever consider maybe leading again? Could it feel differently than it does? Do any of you ever just feel out of place? Any of my stress, my misery, speak to maybe your misery at all? Just give me just some grunts, Yeah, okay. So I want to talk about that. About 8-10 months ago, I'd fallen asleep. Now we're in Denver now, and I'll tell you the story in a minute, but I was laying down. I'd fallen asleep after watching SportsCenter. Woke up, it's probably 2 in the, thank you. Probably 2 in the morning, and I'm hearing this little grinding noise. Kind of startled me. I went back to sleep. Woke up again. You ever get those strange, they're not the normal noises. My son has epilepsy, so I know what seizures sound like. I know what my kids' coughing sounds like, but this was like a weird noise. So wakes me up again. It's now 3:30. I go back to sleep. Finally, about 4:30, it's like, I got to figure out what this noise is. So I start walking around the house, and I'm hearing it. It's getting closer. I can't find it. I go into different rooms. I finally go outside on the, and I can still hear it. I put my ear against the wall, and I can actually feel the vibration. I was like, oh, it's got to be in the laundry room. So I walk around to the laundry room, and I turn on the light, and I hear the noise one more time, and right then I see, I didn't even know we had it. We had a hamster critter, and it was on one of those wheels. So I was just kind of watching it. I was like, oh, we got a hamster. And we have turtles, we have fish. I mean, so there's new animals. They all die every year, so we just re-up and just get it. So this was a hamster, and this is our first little time, and I was just watching him. And some of you have had a hamster. So as I'm watching him, he's running, a few seconds, and then he stops. He's looking straight ahead. I tried to get his attention. Oh, hi there, little fella. And he just focused straight ahead. And he's either catching his breath, but then he fires it back up again. And then the thought occurred to me, well, he woke me up like 4 hours ago. Like, he's been doing this over and then, this little thought came to me. My misery. This idea of trying to lead churches, and we know inside the church are very beautiful people that would literally take a bullet for Jesus, who are authentic in their their love. They would do anything. They may not know what to do, but there's salt of the earth type of people in our churches, but you also have felt maybe the pressure of the general population of people that you go, I just can't get them to move. This would be another time you grunt. Grunt whenever you're feeling my pain, okay? And then you process the amount of hours over the course of your life. Like I look back over that 5 years that I put my family through that, and I put myself through that of just running the wheel, thinking it'll get a little bit better the next day. And if I can just really nail that sermon the next week, revolution will break out. And then every time you drive home, and then Monday morning comes, and you know the feeling. So we're not moving anywhere. We're just dead ahead, straight, because that's all maybe we know, or we're afraid of what it would look like if we actually change things enough to hop off the wheel. So we're going to talk about consumerism and how consumers would actually maybe be inspired to get off the wheel with us. Maybe they would let us off the wheel. Is it possible that you could actually pastor in a way that you actually would look forward to getting up in the morning or on Sunday? And so I want to tell you, if you were concerned about my misery, I want to let you know we still have some tough stuff in the Halter family. My son still has severe epilepsy and has seizures all the time. I have 2 teenage daughters. That's a crucible enough, okay? We have normal problems now. But I can tell you without a doubt, in regards to leading a congregation again, I've never had more fun. And I still don't like to speak. But that stress I used to feel, now my daughters actually will ask, hey, Dad, can I go with you this morning? I used to say no to that because I felt like I just needed that time in the car to be dysfunctional by myself or whatever. And now if my daughters want to go, like I'm not feeling pressure. I actually can eat. I didn't eat usually from Saturday afternoon till Sunday. And now I can eat like right before we start this. In fact, I often am consuming lots of donuts with everybody in the back before we get started. But I sort of want to give you some hope that things did change for me. When we got to Denver, it's a little, again, framework for the story and for the book, The Tangible Kingdom. We went there as missionaries. I did not show up in Denver to start another church. At the time, I never wanted to go back to that life again. And so some stuff started to happen, and people actually began to come to faith because of what I would say is more a missionary way of life that we were living. We had created what we call incarnational communities, and stuff was working. People were actually coming to faith, and our life kind of changed one night when we actually had one of the girls in our group raise her hand. And we were probably 12 to 14 months into Denver at the time. Still no intention of ever starting a church, but evangelistic heart, same stuff was coming out. Had an entire Starbucks store that was coming over every Saturday night. Now there was also hockey relationships related to my girls playing hockey. There were now families on our street that were now a part of this community. And there was probably 30 people at the time. And in the middle of one of our sort of gatherings where we just said, look, we're going to talk about life and God, one of the girls raised her hands, and she said, I got a question, a really quiet gal named Jess, and she said, is this my church? Okay, now if you read the Tangible Kingdom story, Fiona was the very, outside of my daughter and kids, she was the most influential woman in my life because she showed me again that people were trying to find the kingdom. I went to Denver to try to find the kingdom myself. Like, could this be different? Is there a different way of life made available to us? And so Jess raised her hand, and she's now, this is the second time God's sort of putting a little cheese on a piece of string for me to try to get me back. Fiona got my heart back in the game, but I didn't want to do church yet. This is now Jess. Look, are we going to be a church? Is this my church? And I looked at my wife across the room, and Cheryl's going, and I looked at my friend Matt Smay, who helped me write the book, and Matt just had a smile on his face like, can't wait to hear this answer. So I made up something for Jess. I said, no, Jess, we're not your church. I said, we're your faith community. Cheryl goes, Because faith community, it sounds pretty intimate, right? Kind of nice, but totally non-committal. Like, we can get out of this at any moment we want. And Jess pushed it a little bit. She said, well, yeah, and we had this dialogue about how some of them had come to faith. And the question came up, aren't people that have faith in Jesus supposed to be a part of a church? And so, theologically, I know that they have us at this point, but I don't want to go back to that old life that about killed me and killed my family, okay? And so I made up another answer that became essentially a part of the story of the tangible kingdom. I said, no, Jess, church should be different. Faith community, we just have community around faith. We're all trying to find faith and figure it out. I said, church should be as if all of us decide that we're going to go on mission together for God. And they looked kind of confused, and I said, for instance, we've been on mission for you guys. We've opened up our house for you. We buy you all your food. I told them we were flat broke. I said, all that food we've bought you the last year, oftentimes we don't even know how to pay for that food. And I said, you come over, and it's not just Saturday night anymore. Now you come over unannounced every day of the week. And we enjoy some of you, but half of you we don't even like at all. But we see you driving down the road, and we're about to do like a family dinner or do something fun with our kids, and we actually have to tell our kids, look, Shannon's coming over, so we're going to have to talk with Shannon a little bit. And our kids have had to die. They haven't got some mom and dad time because of you guys. We haven't oftentimes got a good casual Sunday because of you guys. And I said, we've kind of had to die to ourselves. And I said, if you guys want to go be church, you're going to have to go die with us, so it won't be about you anymore. I thought, surely, in a normal church environment full of consumers, that shuts her down right there, right? Come and die? It's biblical though, right? But if you say that to people in church pews and in church chairs, they're generally going to go, that's a good journey for you. I'd rather go somewhere where I can not die. Do the Jesus thing without the death. And so, long story short, they all decided, including all the non-Christians, that they wanted to go die and be a church. We gave them a week to decide. We had them write down on little Post-it notes names of their friends that they said, or we phrased it this way, write the names down of your friends that you know will never go into a church, but who you think would love to be in this type of environment, a place of belonging where they can sort of figure out God at their own pace. And so they came up, that 30 people came up with about 110 names. About half of those are a part of Adullam now. And so we said we're going to, I wanted to give them a week to rethink this whole death thing so we could get out of it. And they came back and it was a unanimous vote, yeah, let's go die. And so Adullam was born that day. The next week though, Matt and Maren and Cheryl and I are out on our front porch and we're actually talking about, okay, we're screwed, okay? How can we do church without it ever going back to that old thing? And Cheryl was like, just so you know, I'm not going to be that pastor's wife that I was back in Portland. And you better not be knucklehead like you were. So how are you going to do that? So we started to write down, okay, so what were the things that really stressed me out? Christians that wanted to just hang. Okay, so I said, I don't want to just hang with Christians anymore. I don't want. I feel alive when I'm with non-Christians. So I was like, I want to do mostly that. Okay, Hugh Halter gets to spend most of his time with non-Christian people. We said we don't want to be stressed about having to get enough people in the room that pays the bills. So we said it can't be based around money. We have stayed true to that. We have no money. Okay? By the way, think about that. A church that could grow where you don't actually need money for the church to grow. Alan Hirsch, and we'll talk about this later, this consumerism thing is mostly driven by money. Scriptures say you can't serve both God and money. So when we just keep that as a running thread through this conversation, at the end of the day, if you really have to pay certain bills, and that's required to be paid by those that are in the seats, you are jammed. And the only way you're going to get out of that is a complete gut check on how much heat you're willing to take. There's just no easy way to say it. You cannot serve both the mission of God in His church and money. Okay? And so we said we're not going to let it ever be about money. We said we want to be able to pastor people the right way, which means we want to be able to confront people when we, in our spirit, feel like they're not, like they need to be confronted. I don't want to be afraid. Because I remember back in the old church, I don't know why we do this to ourselves, but we always pick the richest guys to be our elders. Don't do that. Find the poor people. Because then when they act like knuckleheads, you're not afraid to boot them. Okay? Every church I've been around, they talk about that one guy that's a third of the budget, but oh, the guy's killing me. Why can't you talk to him? Oh, we're going down. So we said, okay, well, let's not do that. I don't want to do that anymore. And we made up I don't like to sing, so I said, can we do this without music? And my wife wanted music, so we compromised on that. But we basically were just trying to go, how do we not create a church that kills us? And something that might represent the kingdom. So kingdom for us, it's the good news of the kingdom, right? And so at the end of the day, my family told me back in Portland, Dad, you're not good news. Honey, you're not good news. And if we're not personally good news, our churches aren't going to be good news, right? And so when we started thinking about moving consumers to missionaries, that's really that. It's that opportunity to consider rethinking church in such a way that not only do you enjoy it, but you actually get to really pastor people the right way. Any grunts? Like, anybody want this at all? You tired of this thing? Don't get all excited though, because you got to take the first blow. Okay, it will come down to you. So let's talk about that a little bit. And I just want to throw a few thoughts at you, and then I want to give you a framework for maybe turning consumers into missionaries. And I'm going to walk you through a tool that we created to try to help our own people do that in existing churches. So hopefully by the time we're done here, you'll feel like we've given you something. The Reveal Report, how many of you have read that? Out of Willow Creek, Bill Hybels, I think, will go down as one of the great missionaries in American church culture. And then the Willow Creek Association moved into resourcing churches. You guys know the story, massive. So I think probably the greatest gift that they will have now given us is an honest assessment of what all that great church has produced. And that Reveal Report says that they don't feel like, out of all the very good things that happened, the teaching, the programs, and they acknowledge there was tons of great stuff that happened, they question, though, whether or not disciples were actually made. Okay? Whether or not people learned to feed themselves, move beyond. They actually found out that for people that really wanted to go deeper, they felt like they had to leave those churches to actually grow deeper. Okay, I'm going to read, I was up in Boulder, Colorado, and I asked some pastors, describe to me the very things that you hate the most about pastoral leadership. And here were a couple of their comments. Trying to make a materialistic, distracted, dysfunctional person into a disciple. I can't seem to get our people to actually believe in their beliefs. Did you get that? Yeah. My people are mostly Pharisees. And I think I may be one too. Our church is nothing but a consumer trap. I consume them, and they consume me. I have come to expect nothing more than entry-level attendance and adherence to doctrinal beliefs, and in turn they expect me not to rock the boat. Another one says, people don't believe what Jesus believed, and they don't act like he acted. Another one says, I can't seem to get our small groups to get beyond Bible studies. I don't even want my non-Christian friends to meet most of my parishioners. Last guy says, I'm so dry spiritually, I'm not even sure how to deal with my people anywhere. Our worship service is about inspiration as the chapel service on the Titanic. So, here's where we're going to go. I want to talk about discipleship, because at the end of the day, this comes back to that one thing. I'm so happy that it's starting to hone in now on the fact that Jesus never told us to plant churches. He never told us to try to grow our churches. He only told us sort of one thing that we're going to, have that moment with Jesus about, and that's what? He said, go and make, A disciple, that's all. Okay, so imagine the moment, apparently theologically, the moment you pass over from physical life to this sort of new spiritual reality, it literally looks as though biblically, the second you pass over, which could be today at 5:05, you will see the face of Jesus. Now imagine the moment, okay? My guess is the very first couple seconds is kind of perfunctory celebration, like, you made it to Hollywood on American Idol. There's, I'm in, okay? Then there's probably some questions, I think. I would try to put myself, I go right to questions, really, what about the homosexual thing? Help me with that. Women in leadership in the church. I just always wondered that. Dinosaurs. It's really quick. Were there, what? Literal 7-day? Or was it spaced out? Like, how many licks does it take to get to the Tootsie Roll Center? If Colt McCoy doesn't get hurt, do we win the thing? So you do those, okay? You get excited, then you get your quick questions answered. And then there's going to be that moment. You zero in. And it's going to be eye to eye. Jesus is going to go, I need you right here. What is he going to ask us? So what are we going to talk about? He's only going to, well, I worked hard. That's great. I planted churches for you. Never asked you to do that. Had lots of people in our churches. Didn't like most of them in there. Do you see the number of blog hits I got? Started tweeting. There's there's some movement. No, none of that. It's just going to be, did you make a disciple? And a disciple, I think maybe to move past the word, it might help, because a disciple in our mind is primarily somebody that knows things about the Savior. Disciple, when Jesus said, go make a disciple, we know now that he meant go make what we would probably call an apprentice. And there's a difference. So I was a house painter most of my life, planting churches. If I wanted to disciple you like we disciple people in the church, I would say, look, I want you to come sit on the pickup truck bed, and I want you to watch me paint. If I had this man kind of take the summer with me and watch me paint, and he would walk around maybe and watch me do it. If I said later at the end of a year, can you tell this person about what a house painter does? You could probably tell him some stuff about, how to paint a house, right? He'd say I think you tape it off first, and then you spray it, and then you go get your money or whatever, okay? But if I want to make him an apprentice, what do I do that's different in apprenticeship? I have to get him very involved, right? And I don't just get him involved with a few things. I hand him a paintbrush. I give him the invoice slip. I teach him how to talk to somebody to try to close the deal. Then I walk him around. I teach him everything, how to load the little paper on the thing and wrap the masking tape around it. All that. I teach him everything because my goal in making him an apprentice is that he will become what? That he'll actually become a painter. That's what Jesus said. That's what you and I will be sort of held to task to someday. It will literally be, did you make people that were like me? That did what I did and whatever. So let's frame this now in what we would call spiritual formation. Okay, and I want to, in the book, we give you sort of a framework for an incarnational community. There's some missional people, and we provide a place of belonging for sojourners. And as we provide a place of belonging, they move towards the life of these people, okay? And the missional people have a solid line around them because they live a very intentional life together. They don't goof around anymore. They hold each other accountable to living kingdom, okay? And we don't put any pressure on these people. There's a dotted line because they can come and go as they want. If we're not good news, then if they're not coming to us, if they're not drawn to our life, then we don't think that they're anti-God. We actually put it on ourselves. We say we're not good enough news yet. And we just let them keep traveling with us, and they might leave or they might continue to travel. But what these people do, we said in the earlier session, is they try to live out what we would call sort of essences of the kingdom. And these are just things Matt and I would put down as we would say, okay, what's really kingdom? You can maybe call it DNA of the kingdom, but it's a little bit arrogant, so we don't want to claim that. This was just, we created spheres so we could hold each other accountable. So we could take a look at these missional people and say, what are we going to try to actually hold ourselves to account to? And so we said, there seems to be some element in the early faith communities of what we call mission or pure religion, looking after orphans and widows. An easy way to think about that is just living a life of blessing where you just help people with no strings attached. Okay, that seems to be what Jesus says. You don't boil it all down. This is really the pure deal. Just look after people, okay? So we said there's an element of kingdom there. Many of the conversion stories that you read in Scripture are simply because Jesus just helped people all the time. And if you watch, I actually reread a lot of the sort of healing stories because I wanted to make sure before I talk to you guys, but literally most of the stories, if you go back and read them, Jesus isn't talking to people about himself or doctrine or even trying to get them saved in either the front end of that or the back end. He just seems to just help people all the time. Okay, so that's an element of kingdom life. So if you start thinking about apprenticing people from consumers to missionaries, this is essentially the way that I suggest you want to think. You want to go, okay, there's a part of life that really is important that we've got to develop. We also see that there's an element of what we call communion, and that's watching Jesus just relate deeply and intimately with the Father. So the disciples, as they watch Jesus, they see him pull away and struggle in prayer. They see him referencing that, look, I don't make a move without the Father telling me first. So they know there's this really tight interaction. And so Jesus teaches them, he'll teach them how to pray at times. They obviously process Old Testament Scripture all the time, so there was Scripture going on. He taught them how to have deep fellowship, all those types of things. They oftentimes were in the synagogue. So those types of things represent those essences of communion. Most of our existing church probably is pretty strong in these areas, correct? Okay. Then there's a third area that we think was definitely a part of the life of Jesus, and that's what we call inclusive community. And so as we talked earlier, what was unique, the people that followed Christ were first called Christians in Antioch. And that story is brutally not small groupish. That's a story of, the context is the world is separated by religious thought. It's separated by dogma, by doctrine. Within the Jewish side of the world, people are separated. Okay, it's very harsh. It's very judgmental. On the outside, you've got all sorts of different animistic religions, caste systems. People are separated, and so Jesus starts to come in, and he starts to just get people together. And so it finally gets then you have the Peter story. Jesus has to change the whole paradigm. We've got our main church leaders, racists. We've got to teach them, okay? Now we've got to start taking the Gentiles seriously. You and I aren't even in this thing unless God has to give them a dream. There's no other way to cut through all the BS of that separate stuff. So he has to give Peter a dream. Peter doesn't quite get it. Paul has to call him on the carpet later. But eventually it starts to move, and now they've got to deal with the fact that all these different people are coming together. It's not affinity-based anything. That was the witness of the church, is all of a sudden Greek and Jewish people were together. All of a sudden a husband would actually eat dinner with his wife. Little kids were now allowed to come in towards the community and be with the adult population. Now those Samaritans, there's actually a few of those in those churches now, and all that converged in Antioch. And so you begin to see that part of the kingdom is this sense of radical, inclusive community. So we gave you a little sense of, how we sort of combine saints and sojourners together. Just lost and non-lost people, that's been a dilemma for the church. We should maybe have some friendship, but not really tight with them. Okay? So when you think about spiritual formation, I think there's 3 or 4 errors that we're genuinely making that leads to consumerism. First one is to actually say that one of these is spiritual formation and not the other. So you might draw a big old circle. I'd say primarily we'd call that spiritual formation, right? So it's learning Bible doctrine, it's church attendance, it's maybe learning, don't do the big sins anymore. It's kind of some sin management there. Probably whatever, a few little things that we put in there, but we'd say that is spiritual formation at the expense of not even bringing those two up. I don't ever remember any pastor talking about the sense of providing a place of inclusion for people, a place of safe belonging. We always knew we were supposed to be nice and help out, but nobody ever said, at the end of the day, that's actually more important to Jesus than that. Nobody ever told me that. And what's scary about this is when you isolate one of these spheres of spiritual formation, like if you just pull communion out and you put all your eggs into this basket, without those two, what you create is biblically a Pharisee. Okay? And this was what Willow Creek was actually being very humble about, going, look, we're not sure that we're actually creating people. When somebody comes into Adullam, and we've had this conversation where there will be a few people who will say, tell me about how you preach your sermons. And I'll go, I'll just settle this right now. I don't feel any compulsion to feed you spiritually. And in fact, one gentleman, I remember I said that. He was kind of looking for a fight. He had heard about us, came to one of our services, said, can we do coffee? And he just dove right in. I said, look, Bill, I don't really care about feeding you at all. And he pulled out his chair and started to walk away, and I let him take a few steps. I said, but Bill, just so you know, I do feel incredible responsibility to oversee your entire spiritual formation. And he stopped and turned around and he said, well, what do you mean? And so I took a napkin and I drew 3 circles. And I said, I think our Christian life is made up of a lot of different stuff. I think Jesus, and I started here because I knew this is what he wanted to hear. I said, I think Jesus wants us to learn how to interact with him, to learn how to pray. I think he desperately wants us to know his scriptures. I think he wants us to be in fellowship, to learn how to worship together corporately, all those things. I said, but I also think God wants us to actually learn to live a life of sacrificial giving, spontaneous blessing to people. I think he wants us to learn how to walk in the world seamlessly between the religious world and the non-religious world. That was Jesus, right? So if we're going to make an apprentice, then it makes sense that you have to apprentice every part of the Jesus life, right? So one of your mistakes is when we pull off one of these and we go, that's it. Now I grew up, this is another part of my misery. I grew up feeling like I should never really be in ministry because I didn't feel like I was a spiritual guy. Because all I was taught growing up was, these are the things you do. And then we went through that era where daily devotions were big. Remember that? You just got to have your quiet time. Well, I don't do quiet real well. When I sit there quietly, it doesn't work. I actually got kicked out of a seminary class. It was called Contemplative Spirituality. And I got kicked out of a theology course a few months prior for questioning whether or not grape juice was actually wine or wine grape juice. And then I got kicked out of a Greek class for wearing tennis shoes that were too bright, and they distracted the class apparently. So I transferred to another seminary I thought would be nicer to me, took a contemplative spirituality class, and in that class you were supposed to take a walk every day. And they give you a half hour, and you're supposed to go do listening prayer. And they said, go to the library or some classroom, just sit, be quiet. And then the last half of the class, we'd come in and we were supposed to share what God said to us. And I'm a very honest guy, so I was looking for God to share stuff with me. And every week I'd have to go back and just go, look, I didn't really get jack out of that. I just had another good long walk. Okay. Eventually the instructor called me into his office and just said that he understood, but I've gotten to where I'm a bit of a distraction for the rest of the class in their spiritual pursuits, and suggested that I join the military. I think he referenced maybe a sniper or something, but that's where and I think that's part of my misery. Is I thought, why am I even pastoring? Because I don't like singing. I don't really enjoy fellowship. Not really good at praying, honestly. I love Scripture. I used to memorize books of the Bible, so I love that part. But the rest of the stuff, it was really hard for me. It wasn't until about 5 or 6 years ago, an associate in CRM actually did some assessment on some of our team, and part of that is he said, Halter, you're a true aesthetic. Well, just the name didn't sound right to me. I'm like, you mean like monastic aesthetic? He's like, yeah, you're kind of, I was like, oh, no, that's not me. He's like, no, just time out, let me explain. He said, true aesthetics are the type of people that they connect with God through their senses and through beauty and through what they see and feel. And he goes, I bet you when you're outside, you talk to God all the time. I'm like, yeah, dude. Like, it's just like it's a nonstop dialogue. Whether it's a golf course or hunting or just walking around the lake in front of our house, yeah, I talk. He goes, and you pray well there, right? He goes, you probably, when you're working on a sermon or a talk, you probably don't do it in your office, do you? You go to Starbucks, right? Because I'm like, yeah, I need some noise behind me, and I like to interact with people while I'm preparing. He goes, see, you're connecting with God that way. He says, when you talk to somebody, do you have emotional connection with God as you're relating to people? I'm like, totally. Like, if I have a great conversation with somebody at Starbucks, I drive home and I cry all the way home. And he says some people connect with God through kind of head, but many people are really connected aesthetically with God. And most of us, as we've grown up in the church, if you've ever found yourself being dry spiritually or bored, like I don't think most people in the churches want to be consumers. I think many of them are just flat out bored. They don't know what else to do. That's all the church really offers, and so I'll go ahead and I'll keep doing this stuff. But he was basically saying, Hugh, you come alive when you see people coming together. Other people come alive. And how many of you, just looking at these circles, how many of you, now be honest, there's nothing wrong with being really into this, but how many of you personally really do connect with God in those classic communion type of events? Okay, how many of you, if you're out really serving people, just flat out helping them, you hear that they need help, you love to get in your car and go help them, and you feel close to God doing that? Okay, how many, you're throwing a party, or you're just with some non-Christian people, and you just come alive, like you literally feel like God is just like right on your hip pocket as you're with, okay? See, all of us are like that. So we're talking about an incarnational community that moves from consumerism to missionaries. You're essentially creating an environment where your people can begin to work as a team and experience God in different ways, where the boredom kind of, is this making any sense? Okay, so that's one of the errors. The other error that oftentimes we make, besides just pulling one of these out and isolating him, is to forget that we've got some barriers in between these, and they're natural barriers to our flesh. So in the tangible kingdom, we talk about them as individualism, materialism, and consumerism. And here's what I'm learning, is that even when most people knew us as more on the organic side of church dialogue and discussion, and we talk about church as something that happened naturally for us in Denver, we didn't try to, it just kind of, so that part was natural. But what's not natural is apprenticeship, discipleship. And we don't think you can program people out of them. We don't think you can preach people out. They're entrenched in our flesh. Galatians says that our spirit is in opposition to our flesh, right? It says so that you do not do what you want to do. They're absolutely polar opposites. And so if being an apprentice of Jesus is, if this is spiritual formation, it's all of it together, okay? If that's the entirety of spiritual formation, and we either pull one of those aside, or we just act like these are not a big deal, or we run a 6-week class on materialism. We do 6 weeks on, who's the guy that does all the financial stuff? Okay, so we go, okay, so here's our problem. We'll do 6 weeks of Dave Ramsey. We'll get another small group curriculum and kind of try to get them past individualism, and then we'll do some, these are deeply entrenched. This is our flesh. Nothing of the Spirit comes easy. In fact, it's a dogfight, the Scripture says. And so if we want to see people move out of consumerism, as leaders, you have to actually get to the place where you go, I actually have to transfer now my intentionality towards helping people get past this. So I want to pose this as sort of maybe a new definition that might help you think through this. What if a disciple is somebody that's not individualistic? Okay, what if a disciple is somebody that's not materialistic? What if a disciple is a non-consumer? Just asking those questions should change the way you go, okay, now let's look at what we do. Are we really starting to pull the rug out from underneath some of these things? About a year ago, after the book came out, up to that point, we just always grew slowly because people brought their friends into the environment and we could integrate them. When the book came out, we started to have 20, 30 people some weeks that would come in that were new, and they would go down and they would sit in the front row or the back row of the pews, and they would wait for the service to start. And I'd feel like I felt guilty for a while, so I'd go down and I'd talk to them and try and make them feel warm. Pretty soon we realized, no, we can't do that anymore. But the wave started to hit us, and we had to actually grapple with, are we going to have a framework to actually keep people from becoming this type of thing? And so I just want to kind of process that with you. Don't isolate one of these. Don't minimize the fact that you've got some massive barriers to dealing with before this thing's actually going to move. And you've got to have some framework, essentially, to actually see that happen. So I want to kind of walk you through a framework. And by the way, this is our framework, and we're still working it through. I'd suggest that you maybe take a few notes, but don't duplicate what we're doing. But view it, maybe use it to kind of create your own idea of kind of a process. Because I think, as a leadership principle we live by, whatever you give your leadership to is generally going to grow. Okay, so imagine this, and this is a truism that exists in the church today. Out of those 3 circles, if you look at the amount of money and time that is put into just the communion circle, what would your guess be? The percentage of time, staff time, so you've got staff in your church. You just add up all the time they're around the office doing what they do, add up all that time, add up the amount of money it costs to pay for those staff positions, to provide 1 or 2, maybe 3 services for people once a week, where your primary mode is teaching, right? Maybe some program stuff for the kids. You add up all that time into this environment where you're going to deliver content, and we know from all sorts of studies that once the content's been delivered into their heads, about 95% of that is forgotten by the time they hit Izzy's Pizza 15 minutes after they leave. What percentage of our time and money do you think goes into just this one circle? And we think it's about 85%. Okay, so when you talk about consumerism, here's a sort of an ism about consumerism. There's only one way to remove it, and that is you have to remove what people are consuming. It's your only option. So when all those people were coming to Adullam, we didn't really have an option. We didn't have the manpower. We still have no full-time staff in Adullam. We're about 300 people. So we're essentially kind of a bivocational-led movement. Everybody just kind of throws in and serves. We stipend our children's gal about $350 a month, and we give our worship guy about $250. I mean, we give people little blessings, if you will, but we don't have the money to hire staff. Just imagine that. What if you changed your leadership time after those other areas that are also just as much a part of making an apprentice? You're going to find those other 2 circles don't cost nearly as much. They tend to deliver a lot more, okay? Just process that. Let me give you a framework really quick. This is what we're doing now. So people come in to Adullam. Now again, before this, we didn't really have any consumerism issues because you can tell from our start, we were not going to go back to the old way of life. And because we were not money driven, we never had to worry about whether or not we grew the church. We often talked about, man, how do we keep this thing from growing? So we didn't have the normal pressures. And I do want you to know, sort of tongue-in-cheek, I recognize what you're dealing with is not what... We had sort of a unique opportunity. We didn't want the church to happen. And I'm not proud of that, honestly. That's just where we were at our heart level. But by us not trying to grow a church, I think we actually hit some correct buttons. and we learn some things about the consumerism along the way. You're going to have to process for yourself. You're now dealing with an existing congregation that has grown certain muscles all these years of non-apprenticeship, okay? They've grown really strong muscles on consumerism, okay? So here's what we're processing now as we actually recognize that now those people are coming into Adullam. And as all good speakers do, we try to find verses that support our experience, okay? Actually, we think we're pretty safe in this. So somebody comes into Adullam. They've been in a church their whole life. We walk them through what we call observance, where we actually tell them, we want you to go through a season of observance. When I was in seminary, I thought I was going to be a counselor, as I told you. So one of the things that you did in counseling is that they would put you into sort of environments where you get to counsel, and then the instructors would watch between this little glass wall. And so my first session, this is why I got kicked out, and it was a real situation. So they would bring kind of low-income people in that had troubles, and they knew they can get free counseling from the seminary, and then they'd release us on them. So this one mom, she has a 16-year-old son, and he's basically just delinquent. He just is a knucklehead. He's just rude and whatever. And as I hear the story, mom's been working her butt off, working 2 jobs to provide. Yeah, she's not around that much, but he's just acting out. He's just constantly in trouble. And so I listened to it for a while. I'm thinking a good counselor listens. So half hour I just listened, and I asked the boy some questions, and he's kind of rude to me. And so at the end of it, you know, I'm now supposed to counsel. And I said, look, lady, what I think you really need to do is you just need to get a few guys to beat the crap out of him. And she's like, oh, I know, that's what I want, you know. And so she gives me a hug, and I'm like, oh, master counselor. And so after that session was over, my instructor suggested I might try the military again. So, okay, so what we do now, there's a part, you know, in anything that you ever join, there's a time of trial. So after that, actually, I got into a police chaplaincy program. I'm trying anyway. I felt called of God. I just didn't know what to do for him. And so they put me in a police car, and I rode around. I actually was pretty good at that. I actually got to be involved in tackling a guy and holding him down for the cops. I was faster than the other cops. So I got there first and got him. And they actually said I'd make a great cop. But there's a trial period. They want to see, look, if you're going to be a police chaplain, we want you to have a time of observance. Early monastic communities, if you're going to join a monastic community, there's a time where they want you, if you want to try the Benedictine way, we want you to be with the Benedictines to see if you really, it's like a mutual thing. We want to know if you sort of fit our ethos, and you need to find out if you really believe in our ethos. And so what the time of observance is for, it's really for them and for us. And so you sort of watch biblically where when you read the stories of Scripture, there is definitely a time of observance. People are watching Jesus in the early community, right? That one scripture, remember the story of Ananias and Sapphira? So just this, normal young couple in the church, everybody's given all their stuff, and they decide to go to Home Depot and buy some stuff for their little house. They're newly married, and God kills them. And word spreads throughout the whole church. And it says, great fear seized the whole church. And then right after that it says, and the church grew in numbers. So apparently there was some observation going on. People, did you hear what happened? Like, can you believe that? Do you hear what happened with the way? Those people that are believing in the resurrected Jesus, did you hear what do you hear they're all bringing all their stuff together? And nobody has any need? Did you hear about that? Because everybody had need back then. So now, did you hear this? Like, that's the only place, like, nobody apparently has need there. They really take, so there was this observance. You watch the stories of Jesus where he's walking along and there's multitudes following him, it says. And you get the picture, there's times where he's actually helping people. He's healing somebody, and then it says the Pharisees were there listening. So people are kind of checking it out. Then you see some of those Pharisees go to Jesus at night. They're kind of, look, I got a few questions for you. Massive observations. Zacchaeus. Jesus is walking along. People are following him, and Zacchaeus, this guy, has heard about Jesus. He climbs up in a tree. Get higher than it, so he's a short little guy, okay? He climbs up so he can observe and see, is this really true? The stuff that they say, the stuff that they're doing. Okay, do you get that observation? And it's important because it's sort of a vetting process. And by the way, we're talking about transitioning existing Christians back into mission. We're not talking about how we sort of see the conversion process go. This is classic evangelicals that are steeped in doctrine. How do we get them back on the board? And I'd say there's got to be a time of observance. So what we do in our deal, people come in, and they will oftentimes, existing Christians, say, hey, plug me in. Plug me in. And I say, no. We will not plug you in here, okay? We say instead, what we want you to do is go through a time of observance where we want you to know our story. We want you to know our ethos. That was early Christian community. Paul comes to faith. How many years did they observe him? 14 years before they let Paul enter the community? There was a sense of, look, this is what we do here is important. These missional people, the way we live is critical because if we don't keep up living the way that the kingdom demands, it'll give a wrong picture of our Savior. People won't want that. So we take that very seriously. We do that just as well in Adullam. Many of you have, not you, but many people have read our book, have emailed me. One email it just said, you're mean. Because we share in the story of the people that we've asked to leave our community. And it's people that claim to be Christians that have no interest in living any of our three circles except maybe to have, do a Bible study in the communion circle. And we've actually said, look, that's not what we do here. It's one of the things we do, but if that's all you're going to do, go do that there. If you go on our Adullam website, we direct you to about 10 really good churches. And they're really good churches. But if you just want one circle Christianity, if you want non-disciple Christianity, you want non-apprenticeship, that's just not our game. We don't, okay? And so we have to have a time of observance. You got to know our story. So everybody that came into Adullam the first 2 years prior to the book, I just took them out and I said, this is what we're about. This is our ethos. This is what life is going to feel like if you come with us. Okay? And the other thing that we want to know is we want to know your story. And the reason why your story is important, if you're coming to Adullam, Richard Rohr, spiritual formation guy, said if your stuff is not transformed, it's always transmitted. So the fact that somebody comes to your church through another church, they left that church, right? Somewhere along the way, they made a decision to leave that church. You need to know, if you don't care why they left, then you're the problem with consumerism. If you really don't care, if you're just kind of glad, you just assume, well, the guys must have really not been driving a really good vision, or they're not good, so they're probably better off with us anyway. I want to read a scripture to you out of 1 Corinthians. And I want you to read this in the view of transfer growth, because I think that's what it's actually about, okay? Kind of center in on this, because I think this is important. I think if we're really biblical, if we really take this stuff seriously, if we really think Jesus is going to talk to us about whether or not we made disciples, then this scripture is true. Okay, so listen. It says, brothers, sisters, I cannot address you as spiritual, but as worldly, mere infants in Christ. I gave you milk, not solid food, for you were not yet ready for it. Indeed, you are still not ready. You are still worldly. For since there's jealousy and quarrels among you, are you not worldly? Are you not acting like mere men? For one says, I follow Paul. Another says, I follow Apollos. I go to First Baptist. I go to Second Baptist. Are you not mere men? What, after all, is Apollos, and what is Paul? We're only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The man who plants and the man who waters have one purpose, and each will be rewarded. It's interesting, it doesn't tell us what the purpose, it's assumed, right? Remember, I told you what your purpose is. Go and make a disciple. Each has one purpose, and will be rewarded according to his own labor, for we are God's fellow workers. So just as Jesus gave 30 years and then 3 specific years to apprentice people We get to be fellow workers. The way that Jesus did it, we get to do that if we take that seriously. For we are God's fellow workers, and you are God's field, God's building. And by the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as an expert builder. He's talking about non-consumer leadership right here. And someone else is building on it. But each one should be careful how he builds. Church planters, we train mostly church planters. Church planters are just as apt to just be thankful for any number of people in the room as existing pastors are. It's human nature. Just finally we broke the 40-person barrier. Finally we got 100 people. It feels better in there. And we're doing good, man. Things are going really good. Yeah, we got about 300 people now. We see how that is. Has nothing to do with master building. It just we've bought in that. So here's where it gets a little scary. But each one should be careful how he builds, for no one can lay a foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. If any man builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, exterior stuff, his work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light, and it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test the quality of each man's work. I love the challenge that if we all just reach 3 people over the course of our life, we could change the world. It's the same. If we all just really discipled, apprenticed 3 people, we change the world, right? So the quality of each man or woman's work will be revealed. If what God has built survives, he will receive his reward. If it's burned up, he will suffer loss, and he himself will be saved, but only as one escaping through the flames. And so that's that moment you have with Jesus. Someday he'll go, you're in. But man, those other guys, they were just like, I gave you all that. I taught you how I did that. I told you I wasn't going to judge you based on whether or not you had a lot of people. I told you I totally love you. I'm glad anybody's out there working in my field, but I really want you to be about what I was about. I just tried to get 12 and then a few more, 70. There was a couple hundred. That was the goal, and it worked, guys. Would you just do that? And it's the whole thing, guys. It's all 3 circles. It's every part of my life I tried to show you so you could try it and give people the option. You've got to tell them the real story. And we worry, on the front end of a church experience, we used to call that assimilation teams. Oh man, I remember that in our church plant training. They taught us that people will decide to stay in your church based on the first 90 seconds of their experience. And when I remember hearing that, I was like, oh, shoot, what do you do? I don't think Jesus cared at all about trying to keep people happy the first 90 seconds. I think he tended to do what we call the first transition. So these aspects of kind of non-consumer flow are important, but actually the transitions are more important. So we want to know your story. We want to know why you left your church. And if you go, yeah, we've been at 5 churches the last 7 years, I generally will go, are you sure it was the churches? Like, I want to push that. Because something has to get transformed, or you're going to dump it on us in our community. Okay, so then we move to first transition, which we call the welcome to Adullam. Sounds kind of nice, doesn't it? Welcome to Adullam. When people get done with the welcome to Adullam, they call it the death talk. And that's where we say, look, you've been with us for a while. You feel like you know us. You understand the idea that we would love to have you come with us, but we only want you to come if you really want to come and die with us. Okay? What we found out is about half the people that leave Adullam leave somewhere in here. They don't even want to observe. They don't want to really deal with their story, and they don't really care about knowing the depth of our story. So they just leave. I tell them, no, we're not going to plug you in. We just want you to be with us, and we want to hear all this stuff. They leave. The other half leave right here. If they make it past the death talk, they generally stay with us forever. Okay? So the death talk is just a dinner at our house or something like that, and we just have a great time, but we actually say, look, this is not going to feel like it used to feel in your old church. This is going to cost you stuff. And at least you'll know if you come with us, we're all thrown in too. Okay? And so people do it. So we move now to the second phase, what we call preparation. And preparation is essentially those early pictures of Jesus actually starting to prepare. Remember, the disciples really weren't what we would call, nailed-in Christians. Okay? Doctrinally, they weren't quite there. They weren't even close. But what did he start to do with all these people that, are following him? He started to actually involve them, right? And most of the ways that he apprenticed were in what we would call tension. There's a general principle is that you generally only grow spiritually in times of tension. It's true, you do quiet times and you have good times, but when you really decide you're really tired of pornography, that moment, when you go, I'm really sick of that, and you finally call some other men to help you, we finally are growing. When you're finally tired of having 40,000 on your visas, we had a couple that was in our community for 2 years, and it just came out after 2 years. After we created this environment where they can tell us everything, they decide not to tell us that they've got about $90,000 on their visas. They finally got to that point. I said, why didn't you tell me? And he's like, I've never really had a dad. It got to the place where you were kind of like the closest thing to my dad. I just didn't want to disappoint you. Okay? But there's got to be, this element of tension before that happens. They're now moving through it, but it's a bit too late. It's taken them out of the game for a while. Okay, but there's got to be tension. And so when we start thinking about moving consumers out of consumerism, you can't create tension through a sermon. You can only create tension by putting them into an active environment where they get a little bit freaked out and want to talk and interact. And you see this with Jesus. He's taking a nap in the boat. The winds come up. We don't know if he started the storm or just kind of let it happen, but the guys are freaking out and he teaches them about faith, right? Everything's related to tension. So when you start, I'm not sure if this is good news for you or bad news, but spiritual leadership where you're actually making an apprentice is you actually have to craft very gentle sort of tension points for them. So where initially maybe we were a little bit rude because we didn't really want a church to happen, we're actually getting nicer at Adullam. We actually have prayed some shepherds in that are very, warm and help people process that. So what we do now is that's the TK primer. We actually walk people through an 8-week spiritual formation experience that actually forces them to actually go out and follow Jesus, and we help them process that. I'll walk you through that in a little bit. Next sort of point of transition is what we would, you might call this a call out. Okay? So Jesus has people following him, observing. He eventually turns around and will say, look, I need you to drop your nets. It's a call out, okay? I'd suggest no matter what type of church you have, whether it's organic or big, for Christians that are coming to you from the outside, there has to be a call out. You need to articulate what you're about, and you got to go, we're really serious about that, okay? The second transition is what we call kind of a public sending. A lot of the stories today on the main stage and even in the hallways are that people are starting to take that very seriously. So it's a public anointing, it's a public sending, it's communities. One of the churches that we train in Omaha, we're just sending out more and more communities. Every time they did that, they would bring the people up in front, they would pray a blessing and send them. Okay, there has to be a sending for that. Our next sort of process, I'm whipping through this because I want to get you back to the preparation. Participation just references they're now with us. What's interesting is that Jesus tended to, when he has no interest in creating a consumer, right? He's trying to create a Jesus person. He tends to raise the bar on the front end with people, and then he tends to kind of sort of drop it. So he'll say something like, look, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. We do the same thing. Once somebody has said, we're going to come die with you, and we've sanctioned them, we've sent them, then we basically lower the bar, and this is now a grace-filled environment. So, everything in Adullam revolves around incarnational community, but we say, look, we're not trying to get you into an incarnational community. Our goal is to try to help you to learn how to incarnational community, okay? And it's hard. And there's times and seasons of your life where it's going to go very easy, and there's other times where it's going to be very hard. We're all going to struggle through that together. But once we have the buy-in, then we lower the bar. And our last phase is what we just call partnership, which is a leadership component. So Paul will oftentimes at the end of books, he'll reference people and he'll say, you guys were partners in the gospel. That's a leadership idea. So in our environment, what we're trying to do to create an apprentice is make sure we're being honest with people on the front end. We want to make sure we do what we can to prepare them for the journey they're going to go on with us. It's only right. If you don't have a time of preparation for your folks, what's communicated to them is we're just glad you're here to grow our church for us. But if you say we're going to stop before you make any commitment to us and we're going to actually dive in with you and walk you through kind of a restart with Jesus, it actually communicates to them we care more about developing you than you growing our church. Okay? And then participation is just, the transition in that is just a coaching environment. We don't have any formal training. We usually get our village or our community leaders together 4 or 5 times a year. Well, we tell them once you're participating with us, we are your on-call coaches. So we spend most of our time coaching people into incarnational community. And then at that level, the partnership is really more of just kind of leadership training. So anybody that's partnering with us are those that are taking responsibility for people. So when you think about your design on discipleship, what you're trying to produce, are you not ultimately trying to produce somebody that at the end of the day is going to say, I will take responsibility for those people? Is that not? That's the win, right? They came in, it was never about them leading, it was always what the church can give to me. And at some point, the light bulb goes on and they go, my friends around the corner, I just feel like God's called us to them and we will take responsibility. So we will take responsibility to engage them, we'll take responsibility to disciple them, we'll take responsibility to do their crisis management, to care. Is this making any sense? Okay, what I want you to do is take about a 5-minute stand-up break, and then I'm going to walk you through the primer, and I want to kind of process with you just kind of how this can sort of help. So take a quick breather. Some of you look like you're done. Hey, by the way, somebody just came up and asked if we were going to talk about kind of the flow of non-Christians moving into this. We have not had to actually take non-Christians through this formal process because we technically do that intuitively through the incarnational community. So if you remember the book, or what I just drew for you, remember you've got people that are on mission, and you've got people that are also sojourning, right? It's technically the exact same process. But non-Christians coming in, they're observing us. And we actually include them in the life of the Christian community. So they're actually doing what we do. And what's the public call out at the conversion level? It's baptism. That's where they've observed, they've actually been a part of our community. We generally have then baptized them, and then they start to go on mission with us. So guess who the people that are on mission are? Those that are partnering with us and are participating. That's missional people. And these are the sojourners. So it's actually the exact same process. But when the conversion process is happening, you don't have to do a formal, because they're being intuitively brought into your community that way. Just a little extra credit. This is why really hanging out with lost people tends to be a little bit more life-giving. It just sort of walks its way through. And if they've come into your community by watching the life of the missional people and they like it and they start to participate, guess what the discipleship process pumps out? That's what they think a Christian is, so they do the same thing. You don't have to reprocess new converts. They just that's what being a Christian is. So let me throw this out to you. Well, let me read this just as we go, and then I'll walk you through this. Consumerism, okay? Is a self-focused drive to get as much as I can get with the least amount of effort. It coercively shifts the church away from its true call, from valuing giving to getting. It compels us to protect what we already have and only give away what has become useless to us. It erodes our sense of duty, honor, loyalty, our sense of chivalry to live for the right things and the best things. It gets in the way of leaving a legacy for those behind us because it waters down our present understanding of what it means to follow Christ today. It pushes responsibility and expectations onto others instead of self, and exchanges true spiritual growth for ankle-deep personal devotions, and self-help measures. Consumerism is the breeding ground for judgment, critique, criticism, and creates an unconscious justification to leave something or someone whenever they become less useful to someone's personal agenda. Okay? So again, you've got your option here. We have a no, like you can't complain in Adullam where we boot you. We've only had to use that once. Because when you create an apprenticeship process, people are thankful for anything you give them. I've never had a new convert ever hassle me ever in 2 church plants. The only people that I've spent all those hours with are, hey, guys, we got to just ponder that, okay? Think about your life. You've got, if you're healthy and you don't get hit by a truck, you got 85, maybe 70 of those are functional years to do something that makes Jesus go, nice. Think about how many hours we spend processing people through their judgments and their critique. Pharisees judge and critique. And at some point, the only way that you remove consumerism, you have to remove what they consume. It means you have to stop the critique. You have to decide it doesn't go here. So we pulled the rug out from underneath the Adullam when all those folks started to come. And I said, we're not going to have a Sunday gathering every week. So we went to an alternating this last year. So one week we do Village Week where we just do community stuff. And the other week was our normal gathering time. And we had a lot of people left as soon as I announced that. A lot in our census, 30, 40 people that had kind of come because they heard about the book and they just kind of hung out. They immediately didn't want anything to do with it. I want to read an email from a guy. I think it'll help make the point of where we're spending some time. He says, hey, Hugh, to get right down to it, village stuff just doesn't work for us. Any sort of home group, regardless of the name, is just being at home with kids running around, acting like, he said a bad word right here, okay? For us, we need a place to go where we can participate and kids can be taught and everybody gets a break. By the way, I think that is a service to people to give them a break. There's nothing wrong with giving people a break, but we'll keep reading here. It says, we're pretty worn out by the time Sunday rolls around and we enjoy a break from the rest of the week. When Adullam stopped meeting weekly, a few of us families tried to cram into our apartments a few times and sort of fizzled out after that. Regarding the church gathering, if we didn't have kids, I think it would be perfect for us. It's spontaneous, visceral, bare-knuckle kind of church, and I was excited in the beginning about it. And it's still a great group of people, but for our kids, we want something more, something long-term, something a little easier right now. The way it works now, I'm not sure Adullam is sustainable for families. That'd be a bummer, okay? I guess for us, the 3 little kids, we need a church where there's a weekly consistency and resources for our kids. This is good for them, and it's good for us. Take care. So they left that week. The day I got this, I was over at one of our other villages who had asked me to come and do a baby dedication. So that was at their house. And in their village, they had about 4 couples. Each of them had 3 or 4 kids apiece. So there was, 15, 16 little toddlers running around. And then they invited a bunch of their neighbors for this dedication over their baby. So I performed, kind of just a real raw dedication. It was about 30, 40 people in the room. When we were done, and all the other people were non-Christians. So for me, it was a great day. But I was bugged by that email because I like this couple. And so I pulled a couple of those couples aside. I said, hey, I got an email from this other couple. I didn't tell them the name, and I read it to them. And I said, you guys have a lot of kids. How are you guys, why is it, be honest with me, do you guys really like Adullam? Like the way we do this, the way we don't just take care of your kids, we teach you how to do your own kids? And they were like, well, yeah, we love it. I was like, well, tell me why. Why does it work for you and it doesn't work for this couple? And they said, well, we ask another village to watch all of our kids on Friday nights, and we all go do kind of a date village, so we get away from our kids, and it's awesome, and then we go watch their kids. And so I went home, and I emailed Dan back. I said, Dan, have you ever considered this? And so I gave him the idea. I told him what this other community was doing. And he emailed back, he said, I never thought of that. Now, that couple they came back the next week. So they're with us. But when you're thinking about consumerism, there's two processes. You obviously have to remove what people are consuming. It's like taking a bottle out of a baby's mouth. At some point, you got to pull the bottle out, right? When my daughter Allie was 1, it was her first Christmas, I spent about $200 at Toys R Us. I was excited. I got her all sorts of cool stuff, and I wrapped it up. I never wrap presents because I still don't know how. They're terrible. I duct tape, stuff. But I was so excited for Allie, I packaged them all up, and I remember Christmas morning I start handing her the presents. And she doesn't look at all interested in them at all. And a few hours later, I was kind of bummed. Cheryl was trying to encourage me, and look, she's only 1, honey. She doesn't know what's in there. And so a couple hours later, I hear Allie giggling on the floor. She's on her back, and she's playing. She had ripped off the paper off the packages, and she's, type of thing. And so when McKenna was born, about a year and 3 months later, guess what I got McKenna for her first Christmas? Yeah, I got her paper, but I could have saved even more money if I just recycled the paper, from Allie. But it proves a very important point, is that consumerism only exists if you let people consume something. We oftentimes think, especially as parents, that if we don't provide a certain thing, it's going to really hurt our kids. And what that lesson taught me is that people don't need nearly what we give them. Bishops in Africa and India have less Bible training than American Christian kids if they've gone through Sunday school up to 4th grade. And they go and they plant churches and they pastor people and they do all sorts of amazing things. And we make people that we just keep filling them full of stuff thinking they really can't do it. I think those were some really prophetic words that were coming last night and this morning, is how much is in all of us. They don't need as much as we think they need. You as parents think your kids need a really safe environment for your kids with really great Bible teaching, and we really need that. When really at the end of the day, what they need someday that's going to keep them in the game is they need to see their parents really sacrificing for Jesus. Otherwise, they just won't ever sacrifice for Jesus. So they don't need as much as you need, but there's a wisdom in how you pull the bottle out. There's removing the bottle, and then there's the remove and replace method, which I'd recommend. Many churches have heard this spiel, and they literally start cutting programs and preaching harder and kicking people out, and it hurts the church. There's a shepherding essence to how you move people away from consumerism. You don't just necessarily pull the rug out from under it. You try to replace. So essentially, that story I told you with Dan was I was trying to get him, look, Dan, we're going to pull that bottle out. You're not going to have a Sunday service every week. But if I had at the same time said, Dan, let me throw you a few ideas. Let me put this little sugar cookie in your mouth. What if our village watched your kids on Saturday afternoon? Dan would go, oh my gosh, it'd be awesome. But you're going to have to do that for that. So we eventually replaced what we pulled out, and it was better. It's preferable for them. And now they're doing fine. And that's what you're doing in a preparation mode. You've got to start to put your people in a position where they go, man, that was a lot better. So what I want to do is kind of walk you through this, because this seems to be helping pastors do that for your people, okay? Can we see this? We on yet? Anywhere? We'll wait. Oh, it's back there. All right. Oh, I really don't have that much hair back there, do I? Really? That's what that looks like? Oh, terrible. Okay, here's what we did. We want to provide not a evangelism training for your people. Matt and I have trained, we're into the thousands of normal Christian people through this process of incarnational community, and we've found out you can't train it. Again, it's an issue of heart, getting them to transfer away from individualism, consumerism, materialism. It only happens when they run into a Fiona. It only happens as they interact with the culture, okay? So what we're trying to do is not give you another 8 weeks of evangelism training. We're trying to give you a spiritual formation guide, because your people are tired of trying new stuff. What they want to hear is there's a different way to follow Jesus that maybe we haven't been doing, and we want to try it together. And we actually suggest that when you do this, that you actually invite people to go with you in this. And it's your journey too. It's not, we got a new program, I heard about a cool thing to try. This is you going, I'm not so sure the way I've been following Jesus is actually a holistic way to follow Jesus. So you're going to invite people in this with you. We suggest that you don't do this, you don't let people go through this unless they invite other friends to go through it with them. And what it's going to do is it's going to finally combine those two things that have been separated for all these years, is spiritual formation and mission. What if those two have to go together? What if you can't really grow with Jesus unless you go with him? We're trying to give the church back its aesthetic sense of connection with God. All right, so let me walk you through maybe a week and just give you some pictures of what this will feel like for them. We felt like we had to give them something every day because you can't take a day off from following Jesus at some level, and you don't want a day where you just go about your own business. Okay, and it follows a rhythm, almost like a monastic rhythm. It's going to feel mostly like they're doing it by themselves, but there's going to be some days where they're with a community of people. There's going to be days where they do action, and they're going to get used to kind of a rhythm. That's why we call it a primer. It's not a primer. Some of you said it's a primer. We wrote it. It's a primer, okay? Primer teaches you it's like a Cliff Notes. No, we're not giving you Cliff Notes. A primer is to prime the pump. We're trying to crank the lever for you for about 8 weeks in hopes that you will eventually crank on your own with your own friends and that type of thing, all right? So each week is going to follow this flow. On the far left top, you can see it'll give you sort of the idea, and I'll have to explain it because you can't really see it, but day 1 of every week is what we call Exploration Day. So we're exploring the idea of this. By the way, I'm going to take you back to give you the flow of the weeks. Wow, can't read those at all. Here's what it is. We're going to give you a week on what is missional, which is all the stuff that we've been talking about in the conference. We're also going to give you a week on what is incarnational. Because if you do missional without incarnational, it looks really bad and it feels bad, all right? So we're going to give you a week on the gospel. We're trying to help your people understand the gospel is much more than some doctrine about Jesus that you try to get people to cognitively believe. We're trying to open it up and say it's a much bigger way of life that's available to everybody through Jesus. We're then going to give you a week on what real biblical community is. So we're going to move them out of this affinity small group mentality. It's not, if it's just you and your Christian friends, it's not biblical community. We're going to talk about then the missionary principles of living out. It's what the missional people do to live out in the culture. The next week is going to be inviting in. What does that feel like if you live a missionary way of life with your friends? What's it feel like when the culture starts to move back towards you? We're going to give you a week then on apprenticeship. So we want to help your people understand it. Let's move past this discipleship thing. Let's get back to this active. You're not really an apprentice till you're actually actively doing some things and learning with Jesus. And then that last week, we really put in for the pastor. It's called the intuitive life. And we basically tell your folks, you can't wait for your church to program you into mission. At some level, all of us are built with the ability to wake up in the morning and intuitively ask God by His Holy Spirit to lead us through our day. And that's where we hope that we all get, okay? So now I'll walk you through kind of week 1. So week 1 is on what is missional. And so day 1, they're going to explore the idea. It really means to be sent. And they'll process this page, and then they'll sit at Starbucks and they'll process these questions about missionality. You don't need to actually know them. I just want you to get a feel for the flow. So that's day 1. They just, wonder what it's like to be sent, to be a sent person. Day 2 is always what we call meditation. We're just going to walk them through some scripture. A lot of the reason why people don't want to do missional right now is they think it's heresy. And so we have to actually show them biblically that, no, this is the way of Jesus. All right, so this is a meditation on the first missional scripture out of Genesis 12. Where God calls Abraham. So they're going to process, I don't know if you can read that, Abram's big choice. So it says there on the left side, look, if we go, you're going to have to sacrifice. There's going to be some meaning to it. There's going to be some risk. But there's going to be this hope that if we risk, something of the Spirit will happen. There will be some adventure. Things will have to change. I'll have to live by faith. If I stay and I just do this normal evangelical Christianity, then I will have some safety, I'll have some comfort, I'll have some stability, but it'll be status quo. It'll be some boredom, control. And we say, Abram's big choice, and then we process, if you were to choose your life, what do you want your life to be like? You're going to have to pick. So that's meditation day. Day 3 is always a change day, and this is where we're trying to put sort of the finger of Jesus in everybody's chest and say, if you were to change anything about your life so that you could actually be sent with God's people, we're thinking you're going to have to be immersed in 4 things. You're going to have to be immersed in a new culture, you're going to have to be immersed in community, you're going to have to be immersed in God, and you're going to have to be immersed in tension. We just tell them right off the bat, okay? If you tell them that, people generally like, oh, okay. Well, it's just like a coach saying, look, it's going to be a tough year, we're going to work hard. People tend to want that. If they really don't want to be consumers, they will like the tension piece. If they are consumers, they won't like that, and you'll spend a lot more of your good time with the right types of people, all right? And they'll have some more interaction. Day 4 is always an action day. So we made a very scary-looking little page here. And we just say, look, we're going to practice being sent. We're going to try and get a little bit of missionary sort of ideology into our experience. So we want you to do two of those 3 things. We want you to cross your fence, and we want you to cross your street. If you want to cheat, you can go to an ethnic restaurant, but you have to make sure they can't speak English. Just anything to get them thinking cross-cultural. We generally ask the culture to be cross-cultural to us. We got to teach our people to now be cross-cultural again. So we've had some people that have emailed us and said that was the most formative spiritual day they've had in 20 years. One gentleman described that when he looked out to cross the street is to talk to people that you sort of know, but you haven't maybe really hung out with. Maybe you've been in the neighborhood, you wave, but then they're down at the mailbox and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to actually go talk to them. And he said, just processing through how hard it was just to get out of my house and go talk, it just, I came to grips with all sorts of insecurities. Then he said, but then when I went to cross my fence, interesting, to cross your fence is generally people that, the frisbee that your kids threw went over in their fence, and then they got mad and yelled at your kids, and then you went back over and yelled at them, don't yell at my kids. And so the people at the fence, there can be some issues there. And he said that he had been rude to this person across the fence, and now he had to walk around the block and take a good 2-minute walk and now process, oh shoot, I now have to ask forgiveness of this guy. And he did. And he said that walk home, he said, I finally feel like I'm like growing with Jesus, okay? So active apprenticeship is going to actually produce the change. Sermons, I really don't think are literally going to do anything. Hopefully they support and bring inspiration to what we actively move our people into, but I think this is the way of Jesus' apprenticeship. So day 5 is always a community day, all right? And this is why we say you can't do it without friends. And so we're going to start to process for your folks this idea of incarnational community. They'll see the missional people. They'll start to pray over sojourners. They'll start to process, who can I go on mission with? And as soon as they start writing down names like our people did in the early Adullam days, as soon as you write down a name, you actually start to engage Jesus on that, right? If it's just, we want to go reach our neighborhood, you can go nebulously not reach anybody for years. You write down a name, all of a sudden now a burden hits you. And now you're thinking strategically, Jesus is now starting to grow you, all right? So day 5, and you'll see usually on the community day, we'll tell you down at the bottom right what's going to go on this next week. Okay, so we get your community prepared. So if they're going to throw a party the next week, we're going to say, remember, you're going to throw a party next week, so start planning that. Day 6 is what we call a calibration day. This is now, okay, we've given you the idea, we've let you practice it, we've let you process with the community. What really is going to have to change now? Literally, tomorrow, something has to give. And so most people can't be sent by God because their life is so full of stuff. So we're going to deal with the issue of margin. And you'll see, you probably can't read, but it says, what I'm saying yes to, tithing my time. So they're going to process, what are some things I actually say yes to that I don't need to do? And they just literally will stop doing those, so they have a little spontaneous time. Day 7 is always what we call kind of a communion day. They can grab that, take that to church, just more meditation on Scripture, okay? So it gives you kind of a rhythm of that day. Week 2 is about incarnation, so they're going to start to deal with this sort of posture of the community. We're going to talk about that tomorrow morning in the main session. They're going to deal with the issue of the perception of the culture because we've had such a bad non-incarnational posture, how they feel about us. This gives you a picture of just kind of what that will feel like. This is, I got an email on this day. All we try to do is get them to connect with a Fiona. So we'll say, just go somewhere public, go to a mall, go to the airport. If you live in an urban center, sit out on a bench at a park, watch people, and imagine them as real people, that a third of them, if they're women, have been sexually abused. Probably half of them, if they're under the age of 30, don't have a mom and dad that's functional. Just think about their lives. Look at their faces and actually pray for them with your eyes open. And you find that people start to go, I finally feel like I'm getting a burden for people, okay? You've got to get them out there to get with Fionas, all right? I'll give you just a few more pictures, some days that we've got emails on. Trying to get them passed on. This chapter is about the gospel. Trying to tell them the gospel is all three of those circles, okay? Let's get working. We let them assess where they're at on those three on that day. I'm going to move you through to some days that have been really powerful, some people. It's the power of them, they, and we. We're just trying to get them past relational friendship evangelism by myself. That right now your culture, just meeting one Christian, one good Christian, is not enough to get them over their negative stereotypes or truisms of what Christians are, okay? So you have to architect a community that is the witness of Jesus, all right? So we're not going to let them off the hook. If your friends in your small group, if you're afraid to bring your non-Christian friends to your small group, then you've got to deal with that. No more goofing around. You actually have to go to people in your community and go, why do I not feel safe to bring them here? Okay? And it's hard work, but it's got to be done. You'll see here now we're dealing with some individualism in this week. 3 of these weeks we'll deal with those individualism. 1 week's on consumerism. 1's on materialism. This week's on that. So we're, I don't know what we make them do here. We make them get rid of their TV or something, I don't know. But so guess who that is? That's Zacchaeus. Had one gentleman tell me this changed his life. So as he's processing, this whole day is on people watch you, okay? So inviting in, there's the culture. Even though you're not engaging them, they're watching you. And so he said as soon as he heard that, he realized that his kids watch him. And he said, I realize that's why they don't want to go to church. And so he said he stood at the bottom of the stairs. His teenage daughter, he stood at the bottom of the stairs. He was trying to get up enough nerve to go up and talk to her about how he's been a bad Christian. And so he said he finally walked up and he apologized and he said, hon, I just want you to know, I know I've been a very bad example of what it means to be a Christian. I understand why you wouldn't want to be one. I don't judge you. You have to make your decision, but I want to apologize. And I'm trying to start over. And he said his daughter immediately forgave him. Okay? Transformation. Just by a simple action that you help move you. Was there tension there for him? Yeah, it's when he's walking up the stairs, right? Massive tension when the guy's walking around the block, but it's in tension that people grow. And the opportunity we have as pastors is to begin to architect environments that are scary. Man, it's hard. It's not too hard. It can't be brutal because we don't even live it out. But we've got to architect environments where they can actually run into Jesus out along the way. Okay? That day was powerful. We're having people in this week begin to process materialism. I think on this community day, we actually prep them. We say this week you're going to go throughout your house, do it with your kids. Go through and grab all the stuff you don't need anymore. eBay it or Craigslist it, sell it, pool the money, give it to some people in need. Okay, so it's something they get to do as a community together to kind of practice that sort of Acts idea of bringing your stuff together. They're probably not going to bring all the stuff they need, but it's a good start where you teach them to bring their stuff together that they don't need anymore. So just baby steps into this. Then becoming an apprentice, it's all practical type of ideas. I want to get you to the very last page. This is last week of organic, intuitive Christianity. where you literally do, you just wake up, you lock in with the Holy Spirit now. And you lock in with your community. There's a lot of our communities that are very rigid, and they say, I've never done this. How do I just live? And we draw them a really basic grid. And we have to do it because church has tended to take any intuitive, creative essence out of all of us, right? It just literally just makes us go to sleep. And so sometimes, your classic evangelical comes in and goes, just help me get started. What do I do? And we say, we'll give you 2 of those communion times. That's all you get in a month. Okay, you're used to the weekly Bible study. You can only do 2 Bible studies, 2 fellowship, pray for each other, Christian things. You only get 2 of those. Once a month, though, you got to go help people together. And once a month, you got to at least throw a party. That's it, basic framework or grid. But at the end of that time, we don't want them thinking, okay, have we done, let's see, how long is it? We want that to be intuitive, and that's what's happened with many of our groups. They learn to just, sometimes they're doing all 3 of those in one thing that they do. It really does get to where it's natural. When they're going to go out and have a coffee with some friends, they just intuitively are now calling a few sojourning friends, and they're calling some people from their community, and they get together and great conversation happens. A need comes up in their community, and they find out about the single mom that just got laid off, and they just intuitively call everybody and go, look, let's sell some of our stuff, let's get some money, let's help her, she just lost her job. Okay, but at the front end, I think what we're learning is you do have to kind of prime the pump. You got to help get them thinking this way, all right? So on the last day of this entire experience, you'll see one person walking off in the sunset. We wanted them to have a pretty in-depth individual time. We want them to process, if nobody else in my church ever decides to go be an apprentice with Jesus, will I go? They make an individual decision. And we think it's important because we want them to decide to do that by themselves. Come heck or high water, I'm going to do it. And then at the end of that, then they process, what are we going to do together as a community? Are we going to stay together and go on mission? Or do we just bless each other and go find people to go on mission with? All right? Throw out a question if you can yell. We've got about 5-6 minutes. And we'll try to just hit maybe, a few quick questions. What's that? Go ahead.
Well, I just want to ask about the presentation. Is this something that comes with the book, or is this something that...
No, that's just our little e-file. There are some videos on the tangiblekingdom.com site. That's the only place that you can get this resource right now. So there's an intro video that might help you get into it, but the presentation I've given you is more than you're going to get on that video. What else we got? Yep. Yes, in the back.
Who actually leads the Tangible Kingdom groups, and are they begun on a regular basis, and how often?
Yeah, well, Austin Stone has been using these, and they put them into the existing small group leaders' hands. And that's how most churches are using that. So that's essentially a way to sort of take small groups and move them to apprenticing, missional communities. Church planters are using this to start their core group formation. Okay, so there's lots of different applications that you can use this for. I'm suggesting, remember, we didn't do this in this session, but previous session we talked about a basic missionary flow. When you're starting from scratch and you start by engaging culture, forming community, and then you learn to structure congregation. That's how you essentially do that from scratch. And the incarnational community becomes the center of that process. So that's our Adullam story. Most people that are hearing this already have a congregation that's already structured, right? And you're actually asking the question, how do we get our people back to where we can engage the culture? All we do with existing churches is move you backwards. So the very first thing we coach is what? Formation of incarnational communities, same deal. But what we do is you're in an existing attractional structure in most cases. We say don't mess with the whole church. Just do what we call pilots. Tithe out 10% of your people and run a 12 to 18 month pilot undercover. Don't announce it to the church. You don't need to. You don't need to ruffle the feathers of those that aren't quite ready for this. But you as a leader, it's working best when the leader prophetically call some people not to the church, you call them to your house or to a restaurant, and you say, I want to go on a different type of journey with Jesus, and I don't want to do it with people other than you. I feel like you guys have a heart for the culture, and I want us to go on a pilot together. The benefit of a pilot is that pilots never fail. They're there for learning. If you run a business, you do R&D, right? So you keep your existing structure going, but you pilot incarnational community, and hopefully the stories will begin to bubble up. So in that sense, you would want to prayerfully recruit the people that you know are probably best suited to go out and make this happen. And then you just start the primers and begin to coach that through. What you coach at the end of the day is pretty simple, and we give you the coaching kind of paradigm in the back of the book. You're just simply going to coach that picture. You're going to say, how's your missional people doing? What are you doing to develop them? And you're going to coach, what are we doing to connect with sojourners? You're also going to see the 3 circles. So there's times where some of our communities are really good at the communion thing. The Bible study, that stuff's going good, okay? But they go, look, we're having a hard time with that whole inclusive community, the party aspect. Like we need some help with that. Some people go, look, we would love to go serve people. We need some help connecting. So all we do, it's actually a very simple coaching structure. You just ask them how they're doing. Tell me about what you've done in the last month or 2 in the mission circle. If they go, we need help, then you help coach that. So we're trying to make it, again, as simple as possible, something you can actually, reproduce different types of coaching on. We generally get our communities together, like I said, 4 or 5 times a year just to see how they're doing. But we give them, on the job coaching whenever they call us. There's times where they literally, it can be a group where they're incredible at helping and they're really good connecting with culture, but we've had people that go, I don't really know how to run a discussion. Like in the living room, when the spiritual stuff starts to happen, how do I actually do that? So we'll have to actually coach them. And we teach them, again, a really simple, we don't like curriculum until we created one, then we're okay with that. But we always said just, take that much scripture. If you really don't know how to do any type of dialogue, just take that much scripture, a contained idea, and ask 5 questions, and it will allow you to go deep. And if you have sojourners in there, you don't have to change anything. You just ask what we like about what we read, what didn't we like, what were we confused by, anything we just need, contextually we need to understand. What did we learn about the nature of God? 5th question is key, that keeps saint and sojourner together. Regardless of my level of belief in this Jesus story right now, if I were to change something in my life starting tomorrow based on what I have learned about God, what would that look like? And that allows a non-Christian or somebody that's coming towards God to go, well, okay, we talked about not acting on our anger. So I guess tomorrow would be with my boss. I guess I would not freak out if this happens again. Okay, so it gives you a chance when sojourners now come into your spiritual environment, you don't have to adjust. We had some pastors at a megachurch that didn't think you could go deep if you had pagans in the room, so we pulled together a big staff meeting with their 30 staff, and we walked them through Psalm 23 and asked 5 questions, and after about a half hour, they were crying, repenting to each other. And we said, hey, did you guys just go deep? We did those 5 questions without them knowing it. They're like, yeah, it was like one of our best staff times ever. We're like, just have your Christian people do those 5 questions with Scripture. It's something reproducible. You can easily train it, and away you go. Okay? 2 more minutes. Any other biggies that you think? Yeah.
What percentage of sojourners are typically in your faith community or your community? Have you ever run into a situation where you get so many believers and few sojourners that it feels like the sojourners?
Yeah. Okay, makeup of those communities. Again, all of our communities, some of them are really strong in one of these 3 circles. Usually, most of our communities we find are strong in 2 and weak in 1. The ones that have a high degree of sojourners generally have fairly gifted evangelistic type of gifting in the group. So we don't expect all of our communities to actually have tons of conversion stories. Okay, so some of them end up being very shepherding, but we don't let them off the hook. They still have to serve people. They still have to learn how to throw parties and interact with lost people. So we basically just let them identify, your group's probably going to be fairly evangelistic. Some of our people that are evangelistic generally start their groups without very many people at all, sometimes none. Okay, so they go, look, we know who our friends are, we know what to do. So we just give them this grid and off they go. Other times people go, no, we're going to grab 3 couples. We generally try to tell people not to take more than 3 couples, no more than 6 people to get started. because your communities are generally confined by size of the house. Okay, so our communities range from 6 people to sometimes 30, somewhere in there, based on the capacity of the leader. We don't care. We never try to get them to multiply based on number. They multiply based on mission. They get a heart for some more friends, and they know they've got to go change the parameters of what they're doing. Okay? Anything else? How do we support ourselves? I don't know. Yeah, we're all bivocational. We have usually 3 or 4 streams of income. All our staff do. We don't really, we have people that serve. We don't really even talk like we have staff. It's just 6 to 7 of us that get a little stipend from Adullam. We go out and we work outside, and that's how we get it done. So I will go back to that. Those that have taken this talk seriously, you're going to have to address the money thing. Those of you that really feel a call to those outside the church, even if you're 50 years of age, the church is heading towards you not being paid. You know that, right? Just numerically, if the church continues in decline, it's already carnage out there. Those of you that faithfully grew up in church, you went to Bible college, seminary, knew you could get a job out of seminary, you know it's not happening anymore, right? And those of you that are in existing churches, your churches have declined, and you don't know how you're going to make it. You're 55 years of age, you've never developed a skill or a trade because you never thought you had to. It's going to be hard for a while, but those of you that are younger, I'd say learn now. Find a trade. In our MCAP process where we train leaders through this, part of that is, what's your trade going to be? You may not need it. If you don't need it, awesome. Okay, getting paid from your church is still biblical. A workman's worthy of his hire, but there's also another funding model that's more of a missionary model, and that is Paul when he says to that community, for you guys I desired to work amongst you so as not to be a burden. He understood missiologically, I've got to change the way I posture myself, position myself with this group of people. And that will probably be the wave of the future. So we'd say to younger, prepare now. We've had some older staff that literally have recognized that they don't need the salary of the church, and they, just hearing this, they give up their salary, and that gets a few more young leaders into the ranks. Some actually have had a career in the past, and they go, I could easily go get that going again and still give time. Right now, Matt and I give probably 2 days a week to Adullam. But because our entire process of apprenticeship, evangelism, shepherding is based on the incarnational community, the community doesn't need us to be there answering phones or whatever. They know they have us. Anytime, if you really need us, call us and we're there. No problem. But we don't get called very often. People really do take care of themselves. And, okay, we're done. God bless you for hanging in there.